the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, in one of our previous videos, we discussed the WBC's recent move to crown Canelo Alvarez the quote-unquote franchise champion. Just what exactly does that mean? And, you know, him being the franchise champion, Jermall Charlo was elevated to full champion at the weight. He is indeed the WBC's middleweight champion. And it's funny because in regards to that ever so elusive Canelo fight, Jermall Charlo, he didn't even seem bothered by it. In an article that was published on June 26, Jermall Charlo, he stated he's not frustrated that the WBC hasn't mandated the Canelo fight. He's living his best life. He's got his team, yada, yada, yada. But he didn't seem the least bit bothered by the fact that the WBC didn't do their job and afford him the title shot that he was due for such a long time. He didn't seem the least bit bothered by it. And that begs a question. You know, if Jermall Charlo isn't making a stink about it, then why are his fans? You know, many of Jermall Charlo's fans, they're of the opinion that Canelo Alvarez vacating that title and the WBC making this move was a means to disguise what is Canelo Alvarez circumventing his mandatory challenger. I told you that there were going to be those kinds of people already. I told you there were going to be people that have that opinion. Make of it what you will. That essentially Canelo ducked Jermall and the WBC aided and abetted him in doing so. There are people that have that opinion. So what we're going to do here is we're going to assess the damage. We're going to discuss what happened and what could happen as a result of that based on what stories are circulating right now. So first, we cover the Canelo Alvarez angle. There are any variety of stories circulating out there in the boxing cosmos attempting to forecast just what exactly Canelo's next move is going to be and who should we expect to see him against the next time that we see him. We're hearing names,
all kinds,
you know, from Callum Smith to Sergey Kovalev. You understand that? That's a move from anywhere from 168 to 175. So let's discuss that proposition. If Canelo Alvarez, sometime in September, as these reports describe, as they suggest, were to square off against Callum Smith at 168 pounds, Callum Smith, who is both the Ring Magazine and WBA super middleweight champion, if that's the next guy that he locks horns with, I'll say, since I can only speak for myself, that I'd forgive Canelo Alvarez for having not fought a Charlo, or having not fought a Triple G in a rubber match, or for not having unified the final belt with Demetrius Andrade. I wouldn't complain, in other words. If it is Callum Smith that Canelo Alvarez is going to be facing next, and he were to vacate the two remaining full titles that he's holding, both the WBA and the IBF, if he were to vacate those titles to go up there and fight a Callum Smith, or go up a little further and fight a Sergey Kovalev, even though, given what's going on with Sergey, I'm not quite sure that's the next move. Better still, if that's the way it happens and Canelo were to fight Callum Smith next, yeah, I'd take it. I'd take it, and I wouldn't complain. Here's why. I feel like Canelo Alvarez versus Jermall Charlo, Canelo Alvarez versus Demetrius Andrade, and to a lesser extent, even though it's a rerun, Canelo Alvarez versus Triple G, those would all be competitive fights. Those would all be great fights. But so could this one. And the difference between this one and those fights is that Canelo Alvarez would be squaring off against an even bigger guy than those guys. And it's not just the big guy for the sake of being a big guy. This is a bigger guy than, you know, Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade. But this guy
the Ring Magazine
is one of the best guys at the weight. Arguably the best guy at the weight. You know, this ain't Rocky Fielding. This is the guy that knocked out Rocky Fielding before Canelo Alvarez knocked out Rocky Fielding. This is the guy that knocked out Rocky Fielding. This is the guy that knocked out George Groves. Okay, that's who this guy is. You tell me that Canelo Alvarez is going to make yet another jump in weight to shoot for a world title in what would be his fourth weight class, and I can get behind that. Or at least, at minimum, I won't complain, because it has all the makings of an entertaining fight. I mean, you think about the advantages that Demetrius Andrade brings to a Canelo fight, or Jermall Charlo brings to a Canelo fight, that they're statuesque, they got a lot of height, they got a lot of reach, good power, not the biggest, but certainly nothing to sneeze at.
And their skill.
You think about that. That's what they bring to a Canelo fight.
Some of it.
Well, Callum Smith brings that to a Canelo fight, but he's just a naturally bigger guy than they are. So there's a lot of intrigue in that, Canelo, maybe he's biting off more than he could chew. Maybe Callum Smith hits him with something that, he's not quite accustomed to, sends him to a different place. I mean, there's more of an air of intrigue in a Callum Smith fight than those fights. I'll say that I had hoped that Canelo would shoot for undisputed, it being that entire conversation was spawned from Canelo. That came from him. That he's going to shoot for being an undisputed champion before the year is out. All of that came from him. So I'm a bit disappointed that that's not the direction that he decided to go. Better still, if he goes in this direction, I won't complain, because this is a solid opponent. This is not a showcase kind of fight by any stretch of the imagination. So if Canelo Alvarez is to square off against Callum Smith in September, myself, I won't complain. And quite honestly, I think a move like that would and should allay any of that talk that's floating around. That, Canelo Alvarez, he vacated the WBC title to get out of a Charlo fight. I mean, once again,
give me a break.
I'm not a proponent of that kind of talk. Call a spade a spade. The same things that Jermall Charlo brings to the table to a Canelo fight are many of the same things that Daniel Jacobs brought to a Canelo fight, and we already saw how Canelo did against him. He handled his business and unified those titles. What, you're talking about a statuesque fighter with explosive power and athleticism, in and out capabilities, could fight you long range, could fight you short range. These are the characteristics that Jermall Charlo would bring to a Canelo fight.
Some of them.
But we already saw a guy with those characteristics in a Canelo fight, and he fucking lost. Except the guy that lost has far more experience at the weight than Jermall Charlo. So you ask me, which fight is better? Canelo versus Smith or Canelo versus Charlo? I'm going to tell you Canelo versus Smith, because that's a fight that would require Canelo to enter unfamiliar territory against an even bigger guy than the bigger guys that he's been fighting.
I won't complain.
That fight, if Canelo Alvarez were to emerge victorious in that fight, it would affect the ring IQ pound for pound list. I dare say that might be enough to unseat Terrence Crawford as ring IQ's #1 pound for pound fighter. Because in defeating Callum Smith, not only would Canelo Alvarez have exceeded the number of weight classes he's been a champion in retrospect to Terrence Crawford, 4-3, but he will have added the scalp of yet another world champion, active reigning champion,
undefeated,
not former champion, not to be confused with a guy that used to hold a belt but didn't the night of the fight. If Canelo were to beat Callum Smith, that'd be a hell of a scalp. Undefeated guy at a bigger weight where Canelo hasn't even done very much.
It's like Chavez, fielding.
I mean, that really would, that'd be enough to do it. That would be enough for Canelo Alvarez to ascend to that #1 spot. Terrence Crawford, he'd get bumped down to #2. To address the current narrative, the one I forewarned about in my previous video, that, Canelo Alvarez, he's giving up his belt to Dr. Jamal. He's moving up to get away from him. To address that narrative,
I'm not sold.
Let's try to understand something here. This is a fighter, regardless of you think he won or you think he lost, and he was given a gift. But this is a fighter that's gone 24 rounds. 24, not just 12, 24. With what many people consider, even today, the best middleweight on the planet. Canelo Alvarez went 24 rounds with that guy. And he didn't get dropped, he didn't get stopped. These are the facts. Whether you think he deserved to win or you think he deserved to lose, better still, he did go 24 rounds with what many people think is the best middleweight in the world today, and that's Gennady Golovkin. This is a guy who folded up a much naturally bigger man in Rocky Fielding in between facing Daniel Jacobs, yet another formidable fighter
champion
in the middleweight division, a guy who has some of the same characteristics that a Jermall Charlo would bring to the table. Athleticism, punching power, big reach, big height, you understand? Things that Canelo would have to work around. He already squared off against a guy like that, unified title. So you tell me that this guy is going to throw his title in the air, having done all these things in this division
from fear
at the sight of Jermall Charlo?
Of Jermall.
Who's done what?
To scare him off.
Beaten who?
Send him running.
I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm not a Canelo Alvarez fan.
Nope.
I don't make video after video apologizing for this guy's strategic moves, but I have to say that hindsight being 2020, taking full stock of both of these fighters, I don't see anything in Jermall Charlo that Canelo Alvarez needs to avoid.
Worry
not
about.
what he's been, not based on what he's been doing in recent memory. I don't see it. That's not saying that I didn't want to see a Canelo versus Charlo fight. I did.
Still did.
And I felt that Charlo deserved that title shot, and he should have got it. Anybody who's been following this channel knows that. But if Canelo Alvarez is to go up there to fight a Callum Smith, I think it's going to be a real tough sell telling people that he's ducking Jamal. What, he's going to duck Jamal to run into the arms of an even bigger guy than Jamal?
Give me a break.
Who's more proven at his weight than Jamal is at his weight. I don't think so, ladies and gents. It's got to make sense. It's got to make sense. And that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't. I mean, for Canelo to duck Jamal so he could run into the arms, run into a fight with a guy who's bigger than Jamal and has fought bigger names than Jamal at his weight, respectively, than Jamal has in his. Callum Smith is more proven at 168 than Jamal is at 160. These are the facts. So, I'm sorry, but if that's the way that the cookie ends up crumbling, that idea, that notion, that proposition that Canelo's ducking Jamal, I'm telling you, it's not going to fly with a lot of people. Canelo Alvarez is a marquee fighter. What is the highest earning boxer in the entire sport of boxing? And he has entered that realm to no matter what he does or who he fights, there's going to be someone out there that's unhappy about it. That there's a lot of guys out there that want a piece of that action. They want a piece of Canelo, but he can only fight them one guy at a time. So you're always going to have a guy or a group of guys that are singing that same tune, that, oh, he's ducking me because he fought him, or he fought him, so he's ducking me. There's always going to be guys like that. For Canelo going up there to fight Callum Smith, you're still going to get Andre and Charlo saying, well, he ducked me. But if it were the other way around, if he fought Andre, Charlo's going to be saying that. If he fought Charlo, Andre's going to be saying that. That's where it's at. Stop me when I tell a lie, but isn't this the truth? There are a lot of guys that want a piece of Canelo Alvarez. Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, Gennady Golovkin wants a rubber match. Sergey Kovalev entertains the idea of fighting a Canelo Alvarez. There are any variety of guys that want that fight, but he can only fight the fights one fight at a time. So there's always going to be some unhappy people. That's just what it is. Moving on. Jamal Charlo, he's been in a real tight spot, and I felt for the guy in some ways because that's just the politics of boxing. There are some aspects of it that kind of were outside of his control. That, he's a PBC fighter. PBC, their reputation for not willingly working with others in certain situations, all the belts ending up on a certain side of the street, he was really in a tough spot. One, how's this guy going to get a belt? And two, how's he going to get his hands on some quality opponents? Well, at least one of those problems has been resolved. He does have his hands on a world title. He sits today as the WBC middleweight champion, but there still is one issue to be addressed. And it's quality of competition. He's got this Brandon Adams fight coming up, a fight that a lot of people, they're not excited about it. I mean, I think a lot of people might tune in to watch it, but I don't think very many, if any of those people, are excited about it. Him becoming the WBC's full-fledged middleweight champion in the middleweight division, that still leaves work that needs doing. Because the fact of the matter is, if Canelo Alvarez vacates the two remaining full-fledged titles that he's got, they may not even end up on his side of the street. If Canelo were to vacate the WBA title, the highest ranked guy via the WBA just so happens to be Rob Brandt, a top ranked guy, a guy who's about to be in action very soon in a rematch against Ryota Murata. You hypothesize that if Canelo vacates that title, Rob Brandt may be elevated to full champion, and if he's not, what could happen is the two highest ranked contenders could end up fighting for that vacant title. And who are they? Guess who? Daniel Jacobs and Gennady Golovkin. Okay? So, even if Canelo leaves the weight class, even if he vacates those titles, that still doesn't resolve Jamal's problem. Even him being in possession of the WBC title, that still doesn't resolve all his problems. He needs opponents. He needs to be in important fights. And the PBC, their reputation for not willingly working with others, in this case Matchroom and DAZN, well, that kind of paints Jamal in a corner. You think about the other title that Canelo Alvarez is currently in possession of, the IBF. Now, the silver lining there is that the highest ranked contender via the IBF, based on their last set of rank standings, the silver lining there is that Sergey Derevyanchenko is the highest ranked contender via the IBF in their middleweight rank standings. This guy, he just keeps securing those spots with the IBF. It's fucking crazy. How many times is that? 3? Point is, Sergey is a PBC guy. But the problem there is that the next highest ranked available contender just so happens to be who? Gennady Golovkin. So if the IBF were to try to order some kind of an eliminator for what could be their vacant title, it's possible that title ends up in the hands of Gennady Golovkin, thereby ending up on the DAZN side of the street. A side of the street that the PBC may not want to work with, and that further paints Jermall Charlo into a corner. Because the fact of the matter is, Gennady Golovkin's not showing any enthusiasm at the prospect of facing him. We all know that. So even if he were to become a world champion,
Again.
I'm not sure. I mean, let's be honest. It just doesn't look like Gennady Golovkin is hunting down belts. The silver lining is that Sergey is a PBC guy. He's a PBC guy, isn't he? I mean, he's been there before. So maybe if he ends up with that title, maybe Jermall can unify with him. But it just doesn't look stable. Essentially what I'm getting at is Jermall Charlo becoming a full-fledged champion, that doesn't solve all his problems, because the biggest problem he's got is finding quality opponents to be in fights that people actually care about. And none of this would really be a problem if the PBC showed a little bit more willingness to work with some of these other outfits that are out there. Boxing being the fragmented sport that it is, consisting of various entities all serving some kind of a purpose, you've got to work with others, and the fact that they don't, or don't always want to, I should say, in certain situations, it creates problems for their fighters. Jermall needs opponents. So, an ideal situation would be the guys over there at the PBC, they look at the environment, they say, hey, you know what? Let's call Bob Arum. Let's call those top-ranked guys. Let's call Todd Duboff. Let's ask those guys to let the winner of the Brandt versus Murata rematch square off against our guy, Jermall Charlo. Because he can beat either one of those guys. So let's set that thing up. Let's make it happen, Or, you get your Eddie Hearn on the phone, your Matchroom Eddie Hearn, your DAZN Eddie Hearn. You call that guy, you tell that guy, hey, listen, let's set up a unification fight between your guy, your southpaw, Demetrius Andrade, provided that he, comes out on top against Uliecki, better still. Let's say, you call them, you tell them, hey, let's set up a fight between your guy, Andrade, and our guy, Charlo. They've got history. They're both junior middleweights who moved up into the middleweight division. They're both standing here today as world champions. Let's make it happen. Good fight, yeah? Could be the beginning of a beautiful relationship. But, without that olive branch being extended, Jermall ends up getting the short end of the stick, because he might stand here today as a world champion of some kind, having been crowned a champion without a contest. But that's not solving all of his problems. He seems just as isolated to me at middleweight as, say, Billy Joe Saunders seems to me at super middleweight. Another guy moved up in weight, he won a title in a very anticlimactic way, but at least he had a contest, I'll give him that. He fought Isufi. But, just him being a world champion, that doesn't solve all his problems, because he needs opponents how Jermall needs opponents. So, something's got to happen, man. There's more work needs doing. They might have solved one problem for Jermall, or maybe it's just a happy turn of chance, a happenstance that he's benefiting from. But there's still more to be addressed there, and there is still more work that needs doing.